The Battle of Two Sisters was an engagement of the Falklands War during the British advance towards the capital, Port Stanley. It took place from 11 to 12 June 1982. Composition of forces. The British force, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Whitehead, consisted of the Royal Marines of 45 Commando and 40 Commando anti-tank troop with support from 6 105mm guns of 29 Commando Regiment. The 2nd Battalion, Parachute Regiment, was held in reserve. Naval gunfire support was provided by HMS Glamorgan's 24.5-INCH guns. The Argentinian force originally occupying Mount Challenger, commanded by Major Ricardo Cordon, consisted of the 4th Infantry Regiment, with the bulk of the defenders drawn from C Company, with the 1st Platoon and 2nd Platoon on the northern peak of Two Sisters and the 3rd Platoon on the southern peak, and the 1st Platoon A Company and support platoon on the saddle between the two. Major Oscar J. Mitz B Company of the 6th Regiment, acting as the local reserve, occupied the saddle between Two Sisters and Mount Longdon. Course of the battle. On 4 June the 3 companies of 45 CDO advanced on Bluff Cove Peak, on the lower slopes of Mount Kent, and were able to occupy the feature without opposition. They were met by patrols from the Special Air Service. Enemy opposition was initially desultory, but on the night of 29 May a fierce firefight developed over capturing the two important hills, as they were intended to form part of an Argentine Special Forces line. Captain Andres Ferrero's patrol reached the base of Mount Kent, but were then promptly pinned down by machine gun and mortar fire. First Sergeant Raimundo Maximo Viltes was badly wounded when a bullet shattered his heel. Air Troop had 2 men wounded by rifle fire. Probing attacks around the D Squadron SHASH positions continued throughout the night, and at 11 a.m. on 30 May, about 12 Argentine commandos tried to get up this summer to Bluff Cove Peak, but were driven off by D Squadron, who killed 2 of the party. First Lieutenant Ruben Eduardo Marquez and Sergeant Oscar Humberto Blas. First Lieutenant Marquez and Sergeant Blas had shown great personal courage and leadership in the contact and were posthumously awarded the Argentine Medal of Valor in Combat. During this contact, the SHASH suffered 2 casualties from grenades. The Argentine commandos stumbled on a camp occupied by 15 SHASH troopers. Throughout the 30th of May, a Royal Air Force Harriers were active over Mount Kent. One of them, responding to a call for help from D Squadron, was shot down by small arms fire while attacking Mount Kent's eastern lower slopes. Sub-Lieutenant Clambias Pravaz's platoon was later credited with the destruction of the Harrier XZ-963 flown by squadron leader Jerry Pook. A heavy mist hung over the Merle River area, which assisted the 45 Commando Recce Troop to reach and sometimes penetrate the Argentine 3rd Platoon position under Sub-Lieutenant Marcelo Clambias Pravas. Marine Andrew Tubb of Recce Troop was on these patrols. We were actually inside the Argentine position, so we ended up shelling ourselves. We did a lot of patrols up to Two Sisters. That time, the 6th of June, we pepper-potted, fire and maneuver, for about 400 meters to get out. The 3rd Platoon Sergeant, Ramon Valdez, had launched a counter-ambush through the RG lines, firing 66mm rockets to fight through and regroup. We got artillery again to smoke us out. It took us well over an hour to get away, and it seemed like a few minutes. We killed 17 of them, 2 Army privates, Jose Romero and Andres Rodriguez, and 3 sappers of the Marine mine-laying party were actually killed, and all we had was 1 bloke with a flesh wound. Robin Neelands, by sea and land. The Story of the Royal Marine Commandos. 402, Castle Military Paperbacks, 2000. For his patrol action, Lieutenant Chris Fox received the Military Cross. In general terms, the Argentines were thoroughly entrenched, about 6,000 meters or less across no man's land. The Argentine positions were mined and heavily patrolled. At about 2:10 a.m. local time on the 10th of June, a strong 45 Commando fighting patrol probed the 3rd Platoon position. In the ensuing fight, Special Forces Sergeants Mario Antonio Cisneros and Ramon Gumacando Acosta were killed. 2 more Argentine Special Forces lying in ambush for the Royal Marines were wounded. The British military historian Bruce Quarry later wrote, "A constant series of patrols was undertaken at night to scout out and harass the enemy. Typical was the patrol sent out in the early hours of the morning of the 10th of June. Lieutenant David Stewart of X-Ray Company, 45 Commando, had briefed his men during the previous afternoon, and by midnight they were ready, heavily armed, with 2 machine guns per section, plus 66mm rocket launchers and 2-inch mortars. The troop moved off stealthily into the moonlit night towards a ridge some 4 km away where Argentine movement had been observed. Keeping well spaced out because of the good visibility, they moved across the rocky ground using the numerous shell holes for cover, and by 4:01 a.m. local time, were set to cross the final stretch of open ground in front of the enemy positions. Using a shallow stream for cover, they moved up the slope and deployed into position among the rocks in front of the Argentine trenches. With the help of a light-intensifying night scope, they could see sentries moving about. Suddenly, an Argentine machine gun opened fire and the Marines launched a couple of flares from their mortar, firing back with their own machine guns and rifles. Within seconds, 3 Argentine soldiers and 2 Royal Marines were dead. Other figures could be seen running on the hill to the left, and 4 more Argentine soldiers fell to the accuracy of the Marines' fire. By this time, the Argentine troops further up the slope were wide awake, and a hail of fire forced the British Marines to crouch in the shelter of the rocks. The situation was becoming decidedly unhealthy and Lieutenant Stewart decided to retire, with the objective of killing and harassing the enemy well and truly accomplished. However, a machine gun to the Marines' right was pouring fire over their getaway route, and Stewart sent his veteran Sergeant Jolly with a couple of other men to take it out. They knew they were cut off with what looked a poor chance of escape. In these circumstances, any panic or break in morale in the game was up. After a difficult approach with little cover, there was a short burst of fire and the Argentine machine gun fell silent. Bruce Quarry, The World's Elite Forces, pp. 53-54, Octopus Books Limited, 1985, Major Aldo Rico, commander of the 602 Commando Company, had a lucky escape in this engagement, when an enemy 66mm projectile exploded uncomfortably close. Captain Hugo Ranieri, who took part in this intense engagement, claims that First Lieutenant George Vizzo's posse, although wounded, shot 3 of the retreating Royal Marines. On that same night, according to the British, a friendly fire incident occurred when British units of 45 Commando Royal Marines on reconnaissance patrol were mistaken for Argentine units in the dark, and the British mortar group opened up on them, only to be met with a withering hail of fire from 45 Commando in return. In the confusion, 5 British troops died, including the mortar troop sergeant, and 2 were wounded. The next day, Sub-Lieutenant Clambias Pravaz's men recovered the rucksacks and weapons the Royal Marines had been forced to leave behind, and these were presented to Argentine war correspondents in Port Stanley that filmed and photographed the British equipment. The mountain and Arctic warfare cadre also carried out patrolling against Two Sisters. Sergeant Joseph Wassell and Lieutenant Fraser Haddo played an important part in the capture of the mountain when they discovered with their binoculars from their observation post on Goat Ridge the command detonated barrels of mines the Argentinian Marine engineers had dug in and planned to use on the eastern half of the mountain. Captain Ian Gardiner's X-Ray Company spearheaded the attack on Two Sisters, accompanied by the unit's commando-trained chaplain. The REVD Wynne-Jones RN. Lieutenant James Kelly's 1 Troop took the western third of the spine back on the southern peak of Two Sisters, with no fighting taking place. However, at 11:30 p.m. local time, Lieutenant David Stewart's 3 Troop ran up against a very determined defense on the spineback and were unable to get forward. Beaten from their attempt to dislodge the Argentine 3rd Platoon, Lieutenant Chris Carrera's 2 Troop threw themselves at the platoon, but the attack was dispersed with the help of artillery fire. For 3 or 4 hours X-Ray Company were pinned down on the slopes of the mountain. Naval gunfire rippled back and forth across the mountain, but the Argentine 3rd Platoon of Columbia's Privas held the Royal Marines off and were not dislodged until about 2:30 a.m. local time. Colonel Andrew Whitehead realized that a single company could not hope to secure Two Sisters without massive casualties, and brought up the unit's 2 other companies. At about 12:30 a.m. local time, Yankee and Zulu companies attacked the northern peak, and after a very hard 2-hour fight against 2 rifle platoons, and despite heavy machine gun and mortar fire, succeeded in capturing Summer Days. The Argentine mortar platoon commander, Lieutenant Martella, after having consumed all of his ammunition in an earlier attempt to stop the advance of 42 CDO on Mount Harriet, was killed in this action. The British Marines also lost 2 platoon commanders wounded in the Argentine mortar bombardments, with Marine Chris Cook later recalling, "The 3 officers in my company pledged to have a drink together at the other end of the island, but only one made it. The other 2 left with shrapnel wounds." The Z Company platoon commander, Lieutenant Clive Dieter, won the Military Cross by rallying his 8 Troop and leading it forward at bayonet point to take Summer Days. He later recalled, "I began listening to our rate of fire and I realized we were going to run out of ammunition. Then I remembered a line in a book about the Black Watch in the Second World War. They were pinned down and the adjutant stood up and shouted, 'Is this the Black Watch? Charge!' What I didn't remember, until I read it again later, was that he was actually cut in half at that point by a German machine gun. The next thing I knew, I was up and running on my own, shouting, 'Zulu, Zulu, Zulu,' which was our company battle cry and also the battle cry of my father's old regiment, the South Wales Borderers." 2nd Lieutenant Aldo Eugenio Franco and his RE6 platoon, after having scrapped a planned counterattack in support of Major Cordon because the defenders no longer held the peaks, covered the Argentine withdrawal and prevented Yankee Company from attacking C Company as it withdrew from Two Sisters. Augusto Esteban Lamadrid, a 2nd lieutenant in the local reserve tasked with assisting Major Cordon, told British historian Martin Middlebrook that, during the final clashes, subtenient of Franco's platoon was left as a rear guard, but he made it back to Tumbledown okay. Private Oscar Ismael Poltronieri, who held up Yankee Company with accurate shooting with his rifle and a machine gun, was awarded the Argentine Nation to the Heroic Valor in Combat Cross, the highest Argentine decoration for bravery. Sub-Lieutenant Nazer had been wounded covering the withdrawal, and the remnants of his platoon having been placed under the command of Corporal Virgilio Rafael Barrientos, took up positions on Sapper Hill. Sub-Lieutenants Mascara and Perez Grandi had been wounded in the British bombardment, and the remnants of their platoons were put under the command of Captain Carlos Lopez Patterson, the operations officer of the 4th Regiment, who took up blocking positions in the ground between Mount Tumbledown and Wireless Ridge alongside the dismounted 10th Armored Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron under Captain Rodrigo Alejandro Sola Uga. Post-battle the next morning, Colonel Andrew Whitehead looked in wonderment at the strength of the positions the enemy had abandoned. "With 50 Royals," he said, "I could have died of old age holding this place." Although the British units seemed at the time to have had an easy victory, those actually engaged with the enemy platoons would have been unlikely to agree. 30 years later, Marine Keith Brown recalled the fighting for the Northern Peak and concluded, "My impression of a night attack was that it was nothing like I expected it to be, in terms of a fairly ordered affair with people running and taking out machine gun nests. It was just hugely confusing. It was fairly arbitrary as to who seemed to be injured, lots of bangs and flashes and very loud noises. You had naval artillery and mortars and heavy and light small arms fire as well. It was terrifying, to be honest. I don't know how my colleagues felt. We were pretty much pinned down and we came under direct fire from the Argentinians. Up to that point it was all to do with artillery and mortar rounds, but this was direct fire and they were using what seemed to us to be traces, which was pretty daft. So, you could see where their fields of fire were and we were down low on the ground." British-American historian Hugh Buccino has been critical of the 6th Infantry Regiment's B Company who, he claims, withdrew in a disorderly manner from frontline positions at the opening of the battle, although this seems to have little foundation. Brigadier General Oscar Lewis Jaffa had certainly been planning to counterattack on Two Sisters, but with the defenders no longer in possession of the Twin Peaks, he ordered the abandonment of the feature and later wrote, "All of a sudden, we suffer the first emotional impact. It was 4:45 when we received reports from Major Jameet saying that the defenders on Two Sisters could no longer resist the enemy attack and would begin their withdrawal." Major Oscar Ramon Jameet has gone on record, saying in the Argentinian newspaper La Gaceta that he had designated Sub-Lieutenant Franco to cover the Argentinian withdrawal and that Argentinian artillery fire was brought down in error amongst the company. Indeed, the company withdrew in good order, according to the Spanish-speaking warrant officer attached to 3 Commando Brigade headquarters in the fighting. The Argentine Army official report on the war recommended Major Oscar Ramon Jameet and CSM Jorge Edgardo Pitrella of the 6th Regiment's B Company for an MVC for the conduct of their fighting withdrawal and subsequent behavior on Tumbledown. Sergeant Major George Meachin of Yankee Company later praised the fighting abilities and spirit of the Argentine defenders. Hugh Buccino described the moonscape of devastation. Although Wireless Ridge and the saddle between Tumbledown and William are still heavily scarred, even after more than 20 years, the beaten zone between the Two Sisters bear the most eloquent witness to the awesome power of the British artillery, which fired 1,500 shells at the Two Sisters that night. The still-churned area occupied by Naz's platoon in particular leaves one in no doubt why they decamped immediately, while the saddle itself is dimpled with craters, testimony to the tenacity of Martella's heavy machine guns and mortars. Hugh Buccino, Razor's Edge, The Unofficial History of the Falklands War, 242, Weidenfeld and Nicholson, 2006. With the telephone lines to the command post in shreds, Clambias Pravaz led his men to join M Company, 5th Marine Infantry Battalion on Sapper Hill. He had nearly been killed in the fighting when a rock impacted his helmet after a Milan missile exploded close behind him. The X-Ray Company Marines were in awe of the Argentines in the depleted 3rd Platoon who had put up such determined resistance, and their company commander, Captain Gardner, in the book Above All Courage later said, "A lone rifleman on Long Toenail held out long after resistance had ended on the mountain." There was a humorous moment when the REVD, Wyn Jones, was challenged by the Marines and called out that he was 45 Commandos Padre and had forgotten the password. Some 30 years later, Marine Nick Hunt of X-Ray Company got in contact with Sub-Lieutenant Marcelo Clambias Pravaz, and in a televised reunion on the southern peak of the mountain, he returned the pictures he had found of the Army officer and his platoon of conscripts the morning after the Royal Marines had stormed the position. Casualties: 7 Royal Marine Commandos and a sapper from 59 Independent Commando Squadron. Royal Engineers were killed taking Two Sisters. Another 17, including platoon commanders, were wounded. Some 20 Argentines entrusted with the defense of Two Sisters were killed in the first 11 days of June and the night of the battle. Another 50 were wounded and 54 taken prisoner. HMS Glamorgan, which was providing naval gunfire support, stayed in her position to support the Royal Marine Commandos who were pinned down. Glamorgan stayed past the time she was meant to leave and was hit by a land-based Exocet missile. 13 crew were killed as a result of this attack. Awards received for bravery shown in the attack on Two Sisters. Men from 45 Commando were awarded 1 DSO, 3 military crosses, 1 Distinguished Conduct Medal and 4 military medals. A commando from 29 Commando received a military medal, as did a man from the MNAW cadre.